Are oxalates bad? Here's the truth! According to Victor Prince of Southern Keto. I was actually sent this video by a Patreon subscriber. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe today, right now. Link in the description below to gain access to 1 week early uploads, ad-free content, uncensored content, and an exclusive Discord server for exclusive fans to interact. But I'm not just going to refer to this person as a Patreon subscriber. We're going to feature them on the channel here today. This video was brought to my attention by Linda B. Welcome to the channel, Linda B. Congratulations for featuring. There was some confusion pertaining to this video, so I decided to go ahead and, well, cover it with you guys today. So, with that being said, I'm not going to waste any further time. We're just going to get directly into this video because that's what everyone wants anyway. I've just woken up, basically, and so I'm going to try and get the gears going today. So this is not supposed to be a video recording day, but I had some issues last week on Friday. So today's Tuesday. So anyway, fun fact. Let's get into position, start the screen recording, and let's get going.
All right, y'all, I had to make this video. As most of you know, I love my desserts. And one of the things I use the most in desserts is almond flour.
Yeah, that's not good because of oxalates and oxalic acid, because those are two different things actually, but they're both contained in lots of plants like spinach, turmeric powder, rhubarb, chocolate, anything chocolate derived, so cocoa powder, for example, potatoes, sweet potatoes, tea, lots of things like that. And also, once again, almonds and peanuts even. Lots of nuts. It's not a great thing to be consuming, but both of those things are not. And we'll get into the actual science behind it, the chemistry behind those things, because really the chemistry is what I specialize in. Yeah, but we'll get into it when it becomes relevant.
I get comments all the time about, oh, you're just eating all the oxalates.
Yes, and oxalic acid, because that's also something else that's in plants.
Oxalates are going to get you. And oxalates has become...
Well, they're not exactly going to get you per se, but they are inducing harm to your body. You can mitigate the harm that they cause by consuming them with other things, sure, but that doesn't mean that they're not inducing at least some degree of harm. Sorry, they are contraindicated. Contraindicated. Buy now. Second edition, out now. Buy now, link in the description below. I put a lot more in here, better formatting, all that good stuff. Paperback, hardcover, and audiobook versions are out now. I've talked about the ebook already before. You know that is still on my list, don't worry. Even if it takes 6 months, it's going to be out at some point. Yeah, but they are contraindicated for human consumption. They're quite, one could say, insalubrious, okay? They are plant toxins that are produced by the plant in order to discourage predation by other animals. The main form of predation in the plant's perspective being their consumption. So that's an inference right there. Human beings don't have the artillery, one could say, to fully inoculate oxalic acid or oxalates like herbivores or some herbivores do. I'd have to actually look into how many herbivores really have, first of all, been studied in this regard in the first place, but let's say that all of them have. I'd have to really look and see which ones truly have the ability to ostensibly completely inoculate oxalates on oxalic acid. Okay, I suspect quite a small amount, really, because once again, this is why herbivores can really only consume 1 to 2 plants per species. It's because of the fact that, well, herbivores don't eat all plants on the face of the planet because they would die because plants are toxic. They eat the ones that they've evolved to withstand the consumption of. Anyway.
A buzzword lately, and a lot of people are talking about it. So I just want to throw my 2 cents worth in, and some people are going to say my
fair enough.
price is worth what you paid for it. So there you go. But I want to talk.
Well, there you go.
But I want to talk about what are oxalates.
Okay, so let's just get into it right now. There are compounds in plants called oxalates. There are also compounds in plants called oxalic acid. Oxalates are basically ionic bonds, where an oxalate ion, an anion, so a negatively charged ion, 2- charge, binds with either 2 1+ ions, like sodium is Na+, so Na2, and then the oxalate formula. I'll put it up on the screen. I don't actually know what it is at the top of my head. It doesn't really matter to me. Or potassium, for example. But then you've also got calcium. It can bind onto 2+. So those are really strong bonds that it'll form, which makes sense. Better than 2 1+ charges. So you've got sodium oxalate in plants, you've got potassium oxalate, but you've also got calcium oxalate in plants. I'm not really familiar with how much magnesium oxalate is in plants, but magnesium is one of the compounds that the oxalate ion has a strong affinity for. But then you've also got oxalic acid, where it's actually bound to hydrogen. And anything that is a hydrogen donor, so to speak, or a proton donor is what they call them, they're called acids. So they're sort of the same. They're also not in terms of how they function in solutions. But basically, what happens when you consume oxalates? So let's just focus on the oxalates, not the oxalic acid. When you consume regular oxalates, and let's specifically focus on sodium oxalate and potassium oxalate, as soon as they enter the mouth, they will dissociate strongly, or it will dissociate, whatever you want to think of it as, singular or plural, into their sodium ions or their potassium ions and oxalate anions. Then, once you swallow them and they enter the stomach fluid, they will still exist as free potassium, free sodium, but some free oxalate and some monohydrogen oxalate, basically, which is the first dissociation, where you lose the first proton, because the stomach fluid is very acidic. Then, as it moves into the ileum, so a part of the small intestine, it will enter a solution that is basically about 8 in pH, 8.0, so slightly alkaline. That will cause the monohydrogen oxalate to be converted into free oxalate. It will dissociate again into free oxalate and another hydrogen. So it'll actually slightly acidify the solution in the ileum, or at least it'll have a slightly acidic influence, because again, there's 4 independent variables of pH and moderators of pH. The free oxalate can bind onto things like calcium in the solution if you've consumed calcium with that meal. So let's say you ate a bunch of spinach and that's where you derived a lot of oxalates from, but you ate it with a bunch of yogurt or something that has calcium in it. Well, it can bind onto the calcium and form an irreversible sort of binding, calcium oxalate, which you'll then excrete in fecal matter, and it'll render that oxalate innocuous. However, first of all, even if it renders it innocuous because it doesn't induce harm, it's still stripping nutrition from you if you're depending on that calcium that you consume from your yogurt, for example, to actually supply you with calcium. That's one of your main derivatives of calcium. But also, not all of it is inoculated, because much of it actually does end up in the bloodstream, and then it will bind onto calcium, magnesium that are in the bloodstream there instead. That is when they crystallize and they form these crystalline-like structures that are sort of round, they're bigger than cell membranes, and then they will basically be excreted by the kidneys to the best of their abilities. Now, that's usually to a complete degree. However, it overburdens the kidneys, it seems, because 80% of kidney stones are calcium oxalate crystals. They do abrade cells through the lining of the kidneys. We only produce about 10 to 30 milligrams of oxalates every single day as a metabolic byproduct of amino acid metabolism, specifically hydroxyproline, and I think perhaps glycine, but I have to look at the other one. I know it's hydroxyproline is one of them, and that's great, but going above that amount, just for perspective, there's about 61 milligrams of oxalate in 1 teaspoon of turmeric powder. You can really overburden your body with oxalates, okay? It's a big problem. Calcium oxalate that is in spinach and all that, the rate at which it dissociates, since it forms really strong bonds, is basically 0. They form extremely strong bonds with each other. However, the rate of formation of calcium oxalate in a fluid is dependent on the pH of a solution, because it depends on how much of, oxalic acid or monohydrogen oxalate dissociates to provide the calcium in the solution with more bindable, so to speak, oxalate. The oxalic acid in those plants, I already covered that. You eat oxalic acid, it dissociates in the mouth into basically hydrogen, so hydronium, and then free oxalate, because the mouth is quite alkaline. But then whenever it enters the stomach fluid, it binds again and basically forms some hydrogen, but it reforms into monohydrogen oxalate. But then once it enters the small intestine, it dissociates further into free oxalate and more hydrogen, providing an acidic influence on the ileum but still it is fully dissociated into a bunch of free oxalate ions for binding purposes. So it's either going to strip you of nutrition in the ileum, or it's going to bind onto those molecules in the bloodstream when it encounters them, and it will crystallize and abrade your cell membranes, sometimes obliterating them upon impact. So that is oxalic acid. Those are oxalates. Those are the calcium oxalate and magnesium oxalate situations. Those are the sodium and potassium oxalate situations. They're not good. They're specifically designed by the plant to discourage predation. In fact, whenever they precipitate out in plants, they form raphides, smaller than your cell membranes, and can obliterate them upon impact. And when you consume them, it's slightly different. In fact, I put the picture of raphides in my book to show that, hey, this is what the plant is using this oxalate and oxalic acid for. They don't specifically form those raphides in your body, but it's basically an adjacent of raphides, to the point where there's really no point in me fixing the image or something like that. It gets the point across as to why the oxalates and oxalic acid are/is there. Okay, that is everything about oxalates and oxalic acid. So let's continue.
Oxalate's bad for you?
They're contraindicated for human consumption. Once again, link in the description below.
People that can have oxalates, people that maybe shouldn't have oxalates?
Well, okay, so there's two things there. There's two threads there. People that can have oxalates, that's everyone. Everyone can have oxalates. They can consume them. That doesn't mean that they ought to. And that's what brings us to your second thread. People that shouldn't have oxalates, that's everyone. Because there's no requirement for oxalic acid oxalates at all. Okay, they're produced as a metabolic byproduct, which is an inference in and of itself. The reason they're produced in plants is to discourage predation by other predators. We have not been consuming plants in any significant amount for millions of years, and therefore there hasn't been a sufficient positive selection pressure to allow us to sufficiently metabolize and inoculate oxalic acid and oxalates when they are consumed. Okay, most of the plants that have oxalates and oxalic acid provided to us are from man-made inventions, basically, because these plants never existed millions of years ago, and the ones that did not exist in the form that they are in today. Okay, there's many inferences here. You shouldn't be consuming oxalic acid. It's a problem.
Does any of this really matter?
Yes, it does.
Why might people be trying to get you to stop eating oxalates?
Well, I think we already covered that, didn't we?
If you were coming for a recipe video thinking I was going to show you how to make oxalates, well, you might want to click off now. But for the rest of you that have questions about oxalates, having people tell you shouldn't eat them, or whatever the case may be, or if you just want a resource to share with people that may say that oxalates are out to get you.
Well, they're not. Once again, we already covered the whole out to get you thing. They're not appropriate to be consuming. Just because they don't immediately cause extreme symptoms of distress doesn't mean that, first of all, they won't later down the line, because there is a phenomenon called accrual that happens. But also, even if it doesn't, there are many people that live to over 100 years smoking and drinking alcohol. It doesn't mean that you should be doing that or should be doing those things. You can get away with doing it, but it doesn't mean that you ought to be doing it. You do you, but I'm here basically providing this information in a rebuttal to your video so as to help people that have problems with oxalic acid understand it more, and oxalates, and understand them more, and reinforce their aversion to oxalates and reinforce their active discouragement of other people's consumption, including themselves, because there's a reason, a very substantial reason, a voracious reason, one could say, as to why one would abstain from doing such a thing.
This is for you. Stick around. So first of all, what are oxalates?
Well, I covered that.
Are compounds found in certain foods, and your body even produces oxalic acid on its own.
Okay, so we already covered that. Yes, and yes.
What kind of foods that contain oxalates? Spinach.
Yep. In fact, do people want to know why spinach is known to be high in calcium? Yeah, because it's bound to calcium oxalate. Calcium oxalate, magnesium oxalate, all these ones that I said form really strong bonds. That means they're insoluble. They won't actually dissociate in solutions. So those are pretty innocuous, but that does contribute to the lack of bioavailability of calcium in spinach. Yeah, it's high in calcium in absolute amounts, but most of it's bound to oxalate, which forms calcium oxalate, which is insoluble, and therefore you'll excrete it.
Fruits, a lot of leafy greens, a lot of...
You hear that, Paul Saladino? Yeah, it's in a lot of fruits, like pineapple. Oh, the least toxic foods. Foods. They have the least amount of plant toxins because they want animals to eat it. No, they want the animal that it evolved around for most of its existence to eat it, not any animal. And again, with the whole want thing, that's not how it works. The animals that ate that fruit historically, that grew up around that fruit, just had positive selection pressures imposed on them to develop ways to inoculate those plant toxins. And the fruit had no negative selection pressure to migrate somewhere else, basically. I'm putting it very lightly here, very simplistically. And so it still depends on the animals to spread its seeds.
Vegetables, nuts, grains.
Yes, so have you noticed that all of the things that you're talking about are plants? Because plants are contraindicated for human consumption.
Rich foods have been eaten throughout history.
Seriously? So first of all, let's just get this straight. I have been recording this video right now throughout history. True, fact, because history is basically referring to the past, which is anything before the present. And as Albert Einstein said, there's really no such thing as now, is there? It's a construct. Because as soon as you say the word now, that was in the past. Yeah, they've been eaten throughout history for the last, I don't know, 11,000, 13,000 years? Yeah, 13,000 years? Which does not seem to be a sufficient amount of time to develop a sufficient sort of, well, inoculating method and system in the body. Keep using that word today. For all the toxins that are contained in these plants, okay?
One of the ones that believe that all our ancestors ate was meat.
Well, they didn't. They ate some plant material, but it seemed to be only consumed during times of food deprivation, scarcity, starvation episodes. And it really seems to be in the form of large fibrous tubers, which a lot of tribes today even will actually not consume. They will just spit out the fiber. They'll basically suck out all of the nutritional value, or really lack thereof. I mean, it's no offense. They're doing it for a reason. It's just there's not that much in there. So anyway, for 4.5 million years of our existence, we've eaten primarily the flesh and associated fat of large ruminant animals with added fat. Well, not really, not added fat at all. Not added fat at all. Evinced by stable nitrogen and carbon isotope analyses conducted on the collagen of the long bones of ancient human remains that preceded the agricultural revolution, that showed that we had higher carnivore ratings than that of lions, wolves, foxes, and hyenas. It's repeatable, it's predictable as to what we'll find in all regions of the world, with very minimal error and variation between the values. That's how you conduct science. Repeatability to the point of predictability with very small error and variation around the signal, okay? That is what responsible scientists do. We've only been eating plants to any significant degree for 13,000 years. 12 to 13, okay? I've been saying 50,000 maximum. That's when the megafauna started to become extinct, sure. But that doesn't necessarily mean that agriculture happened then. Every record available shows that it was really about 13,000 years ago that the agrarian revolution occurred. So I'm going to stop saying 50,000. I'm not even going to give that much ground. I was at first, but I'm not doing that anymore. It's just not accurate.
To tell you, you were sadly mistaken.
No, we already covered that. You seem to be sadly mistaken, sorely mistaken, at how minimal of an amount of time we have been actually consuming plants to any significant degree. Because once again, even 13,000 years ago, we were consuming lots of plants, but not even to the degree that we're consuming them today regularly. They were only doing so because they needed to.
It shows that some people had less than a handful of meat a week.
Show the research. That is absolutely bullshit. If you are talking about ancestors from before the agricultural revolution, Victor.
Think about it. You got people running around with crude weapons like spears that they've taken rocks and sharpened off.
Not just spears, bows and arrows, but okay.
Go around and kill animals. You ain't gonna be real successful.
That is a load of bullshit. That is your theology talking. That is your opinion. And frankly, it's condescending because you're underestimating human beings. Have you seen what people in Africa still do to animals? With ease, with no fear, they manipulate lions in order to steal their food from them. Okay, we have an intellect that allowed us to outsmart animals. It's not like we ran up to them and fought them with our bare hands, okay? Although we could put up quite a fight, but for a lot of animals, you can't put up that much of a fight at all. For example, primates that are much stronger than humans. But once again, I mean, now I'm giving too much grace here because we weren't hunting primates. So anyway,
I'll kill you before you kill it.
no, that's when it comes to things like primates. Okay? That's ridiculous. Maybe for domesticated humans, sure. Not for ancient human beings.
They did get one, they ate like kings.
Yes, and if they didn't, they basically fasted for sometimes days, okay?
But I would say it's far easier to go and eat some plants to sustain.
Really? It's far easier to go ahead and do that? So it's far easier to take the risk of basically dying upon consumption, or upon the consumption of a plant in the wild, than it is to kill an animal and cook it and eat it after starting a fire. Or eating it raw. It's easier to do that? Because if I threw you into the woods 20,000 years ago, you are not taking the risk of eating a plant. Sorry. You know that, actually. You know for a fact that's true, okay? You gonna eat a bush of berries when you encounter one? Serendipitously? No, you aren't.
Yourself than it is to maybe go sometimes weeks without having any meat.
That's ridiculous, Victor. We didn't go weeks without meat, because if we did, we would have been dead of starvation. Maybe not to that point, maybe not at that point, but eventually. You're talking about the agricultural revolution, which is not representative of indication in the human diet.
The hunters and gatherers were more gatherers than hunters. They got a
Bullshit. What time frame are you referring to? We already answered that question about 5 times, Victor.
30% of their calories from meat.
First of all, they didn't get any calories from meat because there are no calories in food. Calories are sort of a construct in a way. It's a way of attempting to represent how much energy is contained in food or how much energy you'll derive from food, which is bullshit. You don't directly yield energy from your food in the first place. Everything remains mass. Not to mention that even if you did, the amount of energy you would yield from the food is not necessarily the amount of energy that would be yielded from a combustion of that food in a bomb calorimeter via a massive electrical current, which is how they yield those caloric numbers on food labels, which, by the way, has a 20% error in either direction because energy can't be measured because it's a construct in and of itself. It's an estimation of heat energy, okay? Photons of light when manifested in the real world. It's debatable to even say they exist in the first place, actually, because they don't even interact with the Higgs field. Secondly, you don't think there's any noise around that signal? How can you possibly infer that? The amount of error around that signal is so vast. What part of the animal were they consuming? At what time frame was this inference made? You know, at one point in history, was this inference derived from? In what ways did they infer that in the first place? What methods were used? What people did they study? What remains did they study? What was the sample size of the remains? What the Seriously?
daily basis. A lot of the foods that contain oxalates are nutrient dense, like spinach.
So what? That completely neglects to consider the bioavailability of the nutrition, first of all, and it also completely neglects to mention that there's also lots of toxins in those plants. Can you get that nutrition from another source in a sufficient amount? The answer is yes. In ruminant muscle meat. Okay, and before people say, whoa, the RDAs and the RDIs, though, it's lacking a lot of things. The RDAs and the RDIs, according to who, on the basis of what? Okay, on the basis of one demographic of people that eats a different diet that is also genotypically and phenotypically different from us, okay, that engaged in different behaviors than us, that lived in different parts of the world than us. The best way of actually assessing whether or not a carnivore diet that consists of primarily the flesh and associated fat of large ruminant animals is deficient or not is to basically do a very long-term prospective cohort study on people that report to be consuming such a diet and people that report to be consuming the standard diet that the actual RDAs and RDIs are based on. That's important. The other cohort needs to be on people that the RDAs and RDIs were based on, at least to the closest approximation, because again, everyone's genotypically and phenotypically different, okay? You need to exclude people from the study that have severe illnesses, and you need to, after every follow-up, you need to remove people that may have developed said conditions. That's honestly, that's ambiguous, that's debatable, maybe not, doesn't matter. And you need to compare and see whether people actually present with symptoms, the degree of presentations of symptoms that seem to be from the best inferences employed and derived, really, with the best methods employed to derive those inferences, linked or were linked to bona fide nutritional deficiencies, are actually indicative, or were actually indicative of nutritional deficiencies, Victor. Okay, and even then, I said that's the best study you're going to be able to do, but even then, that's difficult because whether or not those nutritional deficiencies were due to the carnivore diet or not isn't extremely clear or perfectly clear, okay? You need to know how to interpret and conduct science, Victor. Observing case studies of people purportedly consuming a carnivore diet that consists of that content and them presenting with bona fide nutritional deficiencies. Even then, that could be some sort of inference, but those would be, at the end of the day, anecdotes in a way, just as reliable. You need a lot of case studies to inform upon that. So, Victor, ridiculous, okay? Can you, at the end of the day, let's go back to what he said. That was a very sort of deep dive. These foods are nutrient dense, is what he said. Can you get that nutrition elsewhere in ostensibly a sufficient amount? The answer is yes. You can, by eating a species-appropriate, species-specific diet for your speciation, which every single species of animal has on the face of this planet.
They also tend to be higher in fiber. Now for the...
Well, that's not good, is it? Because fiber is a contraindication in the human diet as well. Okay, look into the 2012 study that was posted in the World Journal of Gastroenterology, which is the only study that is actually being conducted that even attempted to control for confounding variables, where they assessed the efficacy, quote unquote, of fiber to ameliorate constipation, and the results showed that it actually seemed to exacerbate it, if anything, or at least maintain it, if anything. Look at the associations between diverticulosis, which is an outpouching or breaking down of the distal colon, which can lead to infection and early death if left untreated because it leads to diverticulitis eventually, and increased bowel motions and fiber intake, because that's a correlation right there that exists. Look into what patients with diverticulosis are prescribed in terms of diet. It's a low fiber diet. They call it a low residue diet. It's a low fiber diet. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Now, to steelman the opposition, you could say, well, since the colon was already damaged, that prevents the ability to, process the fiber the way that a normal body would. For example, it's what we say about kidneys. Protein isn't harmful to kidneys. It's just that you may want to be careful with protein consumption if you already have damaged kidneys. It doesn't mean that protein is bad or anything like that. Fair enough. However, what we do know is that fiber still does cause abrasions, microabrasions, to the enteric lining, which is why it increases mucus secretion, which sort of tells us, hey, maybe it's the thing that actually caused the abrasion in the first place. It caused the diverticulosis in the first place. Because protein doesn't do that. Okay? It doesn't do that. We also know that it isn't digestible. In fact, it's lauded and vaunted for such reasons. Last I checked, if you can't digest something, you shouldn't be eating it. Okay? It ferments into aldehydes, which are vastly toxic even in small concentrations, even in vastly small concentrations. They destroy lipid rafts. The things that, cholesterol and phospholipids are joined together. That's the lipid rafts. They tear cell membranes to pieces. They bind to DNA and actively mutate it, okay? And they will kill a cell outright in enough of a concentration, okay? Aldehydes are they're one of the main products of smoking when you burn the tobacco and you inhale it. In my opinion, that's why smoking is associated. It's one of the main reasons why smoking is associated with heart disease, because they're not good, and directly from the lungs, they go directly into the bloodstream. So that's not good. Not to mention, unhealthy user bias. Of course, they're doing a lot of other things, so.
Majority of people, and studies have shown this.
Oh, studies have shown. Studies show, guys. So Victor still doesn't seem to understand that science can show hardly anything in the sphere of human nutrition science. Inferential statistics can really inform upon arguably nothing of utility. I'm sorry. I know that a lot of people are going to have a bone to pick with that. We try and predict the weather with things like that, and it never, at least where we are, it never goes as planned. Ever. Okay? The world is full of a lot more chaos than order. And I know that humans, being humans, like to crack down on that chaos by establishing order in an irresponsible way, in many cases, because of their, overwhelming desire to, crack down on chaos to the point of irresponsibly establishing order when it shouldn't be established at all. This is a perfect example of this. Risk and chance and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but the sooner we can wrap our heads around the fact that there's a lot more revelation involved in life than fruitful material investigation, the more content we will be, and the safer will be, actually, because when you try and establish order in the world when it's irresponsible to do so, to the point of, getting things incorrect and everything, it results in catastrophe in a lot of cases. Okay? So let's stop with this.
Oxalates are not a problem.
What do you mean a problem? They are a contraindication in the human diet, absolute fact. They are not required for human consumption, and above a certain concentration in the body, they do induce harm. And that concentration seems to be extremely small. Okay? Cyanide, for example, contraindication. Just because the tiniest bit of cyanide won't actually induce any apparent impacts on the body, if any at all, doesn't mean that you should be consuming it. Okay? There's cyanide, there's very small concentrations of cyanide in processed meats, ultra-processed meats. Okay? I don't like that. That should be gotten rid of. That should be eliminated. Okay? It doesn't mean that I won't have salami still once in a while. It's just industrialization. There's a lot of just residue. Okay? It doesn't mean that you should continue consuming the thing and that we should just be, content with its presence in foods. Speaking of cyanide, Victor, look into cyanide contents in almonds. And I don't believe that has anything to do with industrialization. I think the plant produced it itself. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone. Put me in my place.
The people they may be a problem for in just a minute. And what happened?
Well, okay, so really what he seems to mean by problem is becoming symptomatic, like developing kidney stones or something. So why wait that long to see if you're susceptible to development of those things when you can just cut the things out? Okay? Like, at least eliminate them to a very small amount in your daily life. Like a handful of almonds or something a day. Like, just, like, you don't even have to completely eliminate them if you don't want to, but seriously, you should. But we all fail to, meet the pinnacle of perfection, okay? It's just, we should not be encouraging the maintenance of an addiction. Because, frankly, Victor, this is an addiction, and you said it directly in the beginning of the video. I love my desserts. Well, sucks, Victor. You know what? I like apple pie. It's one of my favorite desserts, actually. You know how often I have apple pie? Well, it's been years, Victor, because I know that I shouldn't be consuming that. So...
with oxalates inside the body, well, your kidneys will filter them out.
Right. Your kidneys do filter things out. When you're actually a diabetic, a type 2 diabetic, your kidneys filter a lot of that sugar out. When you have a hyperglycemic episode, even if you're not diabetic, your kidneys actually excrete a lot of that sugar out. Does that mean that you should be doing that? You should be diabetic because it's fine because your kidneys will filter that out? Or you should experience hyperglycemic episodes because your kidneys will just filter it out? Or does it mean that you should try and mitigate that because of the fact that the kidneys are being overburdened by the onerous load of glucose on them? Because that's what happens, okay? Kidney cells have glucose-dependent cells. In fact, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe GLUT2 and GLUT3 transporters. It took me a long time. I'm trying to remember the mnemonic that I was taught. GLUT1, BBB, red blood cells, blood-brain barrier, and fetal cells. Baby. GLUT2, kids' lips. I know, weird. Kidney, liver, pancreas, I think that's it. GLUT3, pink. Kids' lips are pink. Kidney, neurons, that's the N. And then there's another P, placenta, maybe? I don't know. And then GLUT4 is mother and father, muscle and fat cells, adipose tissue. That's a little, there you go.
Pee them out. Your gut bacteria.
Yes, you'll pee them out, but that's, right. Just like you'll piss glucose out. We already covered that.
Your gut bacteria helps to break them down, so...
No, Victor. Slow down. What do you mean your bacteria? Your gut bacteria? Mine? Because no, Victor, because I don't eat oxalates on oxalic acid. The bacteria that you're referring to are cultivated by the body to some extent when you are consuming the thing. It's a way that the body phenotypically adapts to the stimulus that you're introducing into the body, that you're imposing onto the body is what we should say. I don't have that gut bacteria. Not to mention, Victor, most gut bacteria do not reside in the small intestine, or rather the ileum at least. Most gut bacteria are in the large intestine, and fermentation occurs around the colon, okay? That's absolutely ridiculous. The reason I bring that up is because where do oxalates start to enter the bloodstream? In the ileum, which has a very small amount of bacteria. So yeah, sure, your gut bacteria can break it down to some degree. And again, with the whole word your. Who's your? Yeah, me? You? Yeah, your means the people that actually have the bacteria. The question still remains, is the amount that's cultivated enough to inoculate oxalates, to prevent people from having the problems that are associated with oxalic acid, oxalates? The answer seems to be no, Victor. Not to mention, the point still remains that they're not required, and why would you take the risk in the first place? I mean, who really wants to eat spinach?
A healthy gut will help.
What do you mean healthy gut, Victor? So is your implication, his implication is this, that if you don't have that bacteria, then you have an unhealthy gut, Victor? According to who on the basis of what?
If you're eating a good, proper human diet,
Well, that's hilarious, isn't it? I mean, I really do not like the whole, like being, buddy-buddy with keto folks. Okay, ketovore is different, but much of the actual keto crowd, no. They're just processed food junkies that justify their addiction by having a bunch of sweeteners all the time and saying, well, at least it's not carbs, guys. It's sugar alcohols. They just eat desserts all the time. That's what their diet is. Dessert, okay? You're not eating a proper human diet. Give me a break. Most plants nowadays are man-made inventions, and they've been hybridized to be larger and juicier and starchier and sweeter when it comes to the ones that did exist, okay? Look at what carrots were before. They were actually just roots that you pulled out of the ground. This is absolutely ridiculous, Victor. Seriously.
oxalate levels that you can eat are not enough to cause you any issues.
Well, who are you to say that? How do you know that for a fact? Victor, do you realize how much oxalic acid is in things like spinach and leafy greens? The low-carb foods, the keto-friendly foods, peanuts, almonds. Victor, to have a blanket statement be said like that is irresponsible. You don't know that. Everyone is genotypically and phenotypically different. They have different tolerances. They manifest and present with different symptoms to the same stimulus that would render people symptomatic and cause them to be symptomatic. Okay? Some people, when they're having a lot of carbs all the time, they develop high blood pressure. Other people develop diabetes, okay? Which usually go hand in hand. But my point is that some people develop psoriasis. Some people develop, it doesn't matter, okay? And also, there's a lot of variation when it comes to proper human diet according to your standards when it comes to the amount of oxalic acid and oxalates contained in each person's version. Lots of variation. So how do you know that it's not enough? What's the threshold? What's the cutoff? Give one and then give your reasoning as to why that's your cutoff, which won't be a good one, okay? All these like threshold values and cutoffs, as if everyone is the same and does the same things and eats the same way and eats the same amount of things and all this stuff is genetically identical, okay? That's why we resort to the base level logic, which is, are they required for human consumption? No. Can you derive the nutrition that is associated with the oxalates and oxalic acid in another form that doesn't have those things and is also seemingly, ostensibly, more bioavailable? Yes. Okay, so there you go. What the hell?
There's a couple of good reasons why. If you look at the amount of oxalates in the food itself, 41% of it is soluble, 59% of it is insoluble. So just
Right. 59%. The insoluble ones he's talking about are the ones that I was just talking about in the beginning, the calcium oxalate ones. They don't dissociate, so you basically just excrete them, okay? But guess what? That makes it to where the calcium in there is not bioavailable. The magnesium in there isn't bioavailable, first of all. So great. You've just divulged that unconsciously without even realizing it, okay? But also, is the 41% of the soluble oxalates, which by the way, I'm sure that there's some error around that because it depends on the plant, but let's just take those numbers at face value because it still doesn't matter. Let's say the 41% of soluble ones, yes, it's 41% soluble, okay? Are those enough to cause people issues, Victor? Are they required for human consumption, Victor? The answers to those, the latter is no. And the answer to the first question is it seems so, or at least it could be. And therefore, that's enough. That's enough. Okay, they could be a problem. So be careful if you insist on eating them. We warned you. And also, you shouldn't be eating them, okay?
take that right off the top. And there's a study, and I'll link all this down in the description for you so you can
Studies show. We'll look at them.
for yourself. Don't take my word for it or anybody else's, especially
I'm not going to.
if they don't give you any proof. But a study
So your implication now is that these studies are proof that you're correct. Okay, he's really hyping this up.
less than 6% of all oxalates that go into the body even get absorbed by the body.
Okay, so we need to go ahead and look at, first of all, what the oxalates were consumed with. we need to know what the absolute levels are that we're talking about, because you just gave a relative outcome statistic, which is a percentage. Okay, 6% of what? What were the absolute values? What does 6% equate to in absolute terms? That's what I'm saying. Okay, the oxalates consumed, we need to see which ones are soluble and which ones are insoluble. Okay, we also need to know what the operational definition is of oxalate, because there is oxalic acid and then there are oxalates, and we covered that in the beginning. Okay, we also need to understand that we need to know what the sample size even is in the first place to understand the statistical power that the study had. We need to look at the signal to noise ratio. We need to look at whether the signal to noise ratio was represented as a standard error or a standard deviation, because that's also important. We need to look at the demographic of people and understand that they are genotypically and phenotypically different from each other. Okay, we also need to look at how long the study went on for, because, well, what if their body adapts to it and makes it even less, by the way? See, that would actually undermine my point, but the point is that just there's a lot of details missing. So let's go and look at these studies that he has in the bottom of the description here, in the description. Okay, Oxalobacter formigenes colonization. So that's a gut bacteria that breaks down, oxalic acid or oxalates. Not sure which one, it doesn't really matter. And oxalate dynamics in a mouse model. Okay, so mice, right? Cool. That's great. A mouse model. A mouse model. So what was the sample size of the mice? That's just fun. A lot of times I would just throw the study away, but I'm recording a video and we're just gonna, just for fun, delve into this. Animal and human studies have provided compelling evidence that colonization of the intestine with Oxalobacter formigenes reduces urinary oxalate excretion and lowers the risk of forming calcium oxalate kidney stones. Well, not risk, first of all, but you can see how they would lead to that conclusion. And we can also see that, yeah, sure, that's fine. We already covered the gut bacteria thing. So yes, if you consume oxalates, your body gets better at withstanding the oxalate load, but it doesn't mean that it does so to the point of complete inoculation, and it doesn't make the oxalates actually required for human consumption, and it doesn't mean that you should be consuming those foods. So we're already done there. The mechanism providing protection appears to be related to the unique ability of Oxalobacter formigenes to rely on oxalate as a major source of carbon and energy for growth. Okay. However, much is not known about the factors that influence colonization and host-bacterium interactions. We have colonized mice with Oxalobacter formigenes and systematically investigated the impacts of diets with different levels of calcium and oxalate on... Okay, so it doesn't matter, does it? We already covered this. It doesn't matter, okay? The use of low oxalate purified diets showed that 80% of animals retained Oxalobacter formigenes colonization after a 1-week dietary oxalate deprivation. That doesn't mean that they will keep it for any longer. So we know you cannot extrapolate the findings beyond its tenure, that being 1 week. So good. Anyway, it's just a bullshit study. We're not mice. They have a different diet than us, and therefore they probably have a different genetic predisposition, genotypic predisposition to having Oxalobacter in their stomachs, considering they're opportunistic omnivores. The induction of oxalate metabolism in vivo is more effective with functional microbial communities than with functional microbial species. So we already, okay, so more gut bacteria. We already got that, okay? Oxalate, effect on calcium absorbability. Absorption of calcium from intrinsically labeled calcium oxalate was measured in 18 normal women and compared with absorption of calcium from milk in these same subjects, both when the test substances were ingested in separate meals and when ingested together. Okay, fractional calcium absorption from oxalate averaged 0.1 plus or minus 0.043. Okay, so let's look at that. 0.1 divided by 0.043. Okay, so a somewhat strong signal, but not really. Okay, just so you know, we should be really aiming in science for about 5 or more of a signal to noise ratio. If you have 2 or more, at least it has a strong enough signal to the point where it's, greater than the noise. When ingested alone, fractional calcium absorption from oxalate averaged 0.1 plus or minus 0.043, right? When ingested alone, and 0.140 plus or minus 0.063 when ingested together with milk. Okay, so what the is this supposed to show? Absorption was as expected, substantially lower than the absorption from milk, 0.35. Okay, so great. Nevertheless, calcium oxalate absorbability in these women was higher than we had previously found for spinach calcium. Well, most of the calcium in spinach is bound to oxalate in the first place, but so they extracted calcium from spinach or something, and then what is this? When milk and calcium oxalate were ingested together, there was no interference of oxalate in milk calcium absorption and no evidence of tracer exchange between the two labels. Yeah, well, that makes sense because the calcium oxalate from spinach is insoluble and therefore it's not going to dissociate and cause the oxalate to bind to the calcium from milk. No evidence of trace or exchange between the two labeled calcium species. Well, of course there won't be. What the is this study, Victor? What the hell is this? What's the fourth one? Here we go. He just basically just slung a bunch of studies here. Dietary oxalate and kidney stone formation. Reduction of urinary oxalate excretion of 12 healthy subjects. Cool. 12. Consuming a diet lacking oxalate. Relative amounts of urinary oxalate derived from intestinal absorption and endogenous synthesis are shown. Values are mean with standard deviations. So minimal standard deviations here, but a little bit up here. And it decreases after 5 days. So this is the baseline for endogenous synthesis. See how it's 10 milligrams per gram of creatinine? Very low. And on here, it was 17 to 18 or something. What the is this supposed to show? What the is this supposed to show? R value 0.99, dietary oxalate milligrams, 24-hour urinary oxalate, 1,000 milligram calcium diets. What the is this? What the is this study? This is like a review. It's not even a study. Doesn't show anything. Yeah, it's an article. Here's another article. What is this one? Okay, well, this one isn't loading. Okay, so we'll skip that one. It's not loading. What about this one? Effective different cooking methods on vegetable oxalate content. Great. Approximately 75% of all kidney stones are composed primarily of calcium oxalate. Well, there's your sign, isn't it? And hyperoxaluria is a primary risk factor for this disorder. Not a risk factor, associative, but fine. 9 types of raw and cooked vegetables were analyzed for oxalate using an enzymatic method. There was a high proportion of water-soluble oxalate in most of the tested raw vegetables. Boiling markedly reduced soluble oxalate content by 30 to 87%. It was more effective than steaming, 5 to 53%. Okay, so once again, yes, we know that cooking will cause an elimination of a lot of plant toxins, but does it eliminate them enough to the point of not causing issues? And also, why would you go through the process of doing that if you can just not consume them? I mean, this is great information to know. If you have to depend on these foods in a subsistence method, in a starvation situation, great. Yes, the best way, if you're curious, to actually eliminate things like oxalates and all these other plant toxins is boiling. Because it will leach the things out into the water and then you can dump the water out, okay? Great, so we know that now. And soaking beans beforehand and then doing the... But why would you go and do these things if you could just not consume them? What the I'm not looking at the other studies, I'm sorry. The studies that he was referencing where he said, oh, in the bottom, it shows that it reduces it and like only 6% of the things are absorbed. First of all, I didn't see that at all. I didn't. But second of all, so what? Those studies didn't show it. They were piss poor studies because we just opened a study that was talking about cooking methods and he hasn't even gotten to cooking methods yet, which means that if they are listed in order, none of those studies showed what he thinks they showed. Okay? They're weak.
You're talking about a minuscule amount. So for example, a half cup of cooked spinach has 750 milligrams of oxalates.
Holy sh**. Holy sh**. That's insane. Guys, a cup of spinach.
So 6% of that's actually getting absorbed.
No, in that study, perhaps, because I didn't see anything, in that group of people on that given day or throughout the given time that the study was conducted. No, not to mention, what is 6% of 750? 0.06 times 750. Okay, that's 45 milligrams. Okay, your body produces 10 to 30 milligrams per day. And that study that he was just showing, it showed that it bottomed out at 10 milligrams. So 45 milligrams, well, that's 4.5 times the amount that your body is used to creating on its own. Not to mention, that is with 1 cup of spinach. He really thought that proved his point. That supported his point. 1 cup of spinach. First of all, these people that are eating spinach with their little spinach salads and all this stuff, are they eating 1 cup? No. Not to mention that even if they were, they're not just eating spinach as their source of oxalic acid and oxalates in their entire day. They're eating a lot of other things, aren't they? Like almond flour and chocolate. That really didn't prove your point at all, Victor. It really didn't. Not to mention that once again, to go back to my original point, I didn't see anything that showed 6% are absorbed, okay? I didn't see anything that showed that. And also, it could be higher or lower depending on who you are and what your behaviors are, okay?
Body should filter it out.
Doesn't matter if it filters it out, Victor. First of all, what percentage is filtered out? and which percentage is deposited in joints. Not to mention that if all of it is filtered out, it doesn't mean that it's not an overburdening of your kidneys.
Of almonds, 460 milligrams of
That's a ton, Victor.
oxalates. 6% may get absorbed.
Okay, so once again, with the percentage that is based on very vapid and unsophisticated science, but 0.06 times 450 is 27, which is 2.7 times more than your body produces on its own. Okay? What the Victor, this is nonsense. Even if you were to take the 30 milligram amount, okay? That's 90% more than your body is used to producing on its own, okay? Just did it on the screen there. 27 divided by 30, 0.9. 90% more oxalate is going in, okay? Hell. How much almonds? But how many almonds, by the way?
460. That's actually getting absorbed. And your body should filter it out. A cup of almonds.
A cup of almonds. So better, I guess, because you're talking about a cup of almonds as opposed to a cup of spinach.
460 milligrams of oxalates.
Oh, it's 460. Sorry, not 450. So it's actually more. You know what? I just want to see if it reaches 100. If I actually put in 460. 460 times 0.06. Divided by 30. So 92% more. Whatever. Who cares?
6% may get absorbed. So the
May. You see that?
liver and kidneys work together to get rid of these out of the body. So
Oh, God. It doesn't matter, Victor. We covered that.
why are people even talking about this as being an issue?
Well, because of everything that I said in the beginning, Victor. Look into oxalate dumping.
There's a small percentage of people that
Define the percentage, and also how do you know it's a small percentage? What demographic was studied? What was the standard error if you're going to infer to an entire population? Do you know anything about inferential statistics at all? You are making generalizations based on small samples. And frankly, Victor, if the quality of study that you are referencing right now is anything like the quality of studies that we saw in the description, I am not even slightly, even remotely interested in that assertion there, okay? In accepting it, rather. A small percentage. According to who? On the basis of what, Victor?
probably shouldn't eat oxalates. But even those people have
Probably shouldn't eat oxalates. No one should, Victor.
ways to mitigate the effects of oxalates.
So we already covered that. So cooking, and you can also consume calcium and magnesium with your oxalic acid, fine. But again, what is the I mean, unless you're just really in the taste like once in a great while for almonds or something. Yeah, okay, great. So you can mitigate it by blanching the almonds. You can mitigate, well, not really with oxalate, that's with lectins, but you can mitigate it by putting them in yogurt or something. I don't know, but it doesn't mean that you ought to be consuming them.
So the ones you don't pee out in the digestive system, they bind to calcium and
We covered that, didn't we? In the ileum, yes.
form compounds that you poop out.
So what?
A couple of different ways that your body likes to get rid of oxalates. Now, who might have a problem with oxalates?
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I'm zoning out. I genuinely am zoning out. But trust me, I'm catching stuff still. I'm catching it all. There's just a lag. Did you just say that the body likes to get rid of them? Interesting.
So with people with weakened kidney function
Or optimal kidney function.
or that are prone to having kidney stones or have kidney stones, I wouldn't recommend oxalates.
So you just admitted that they contribute to calcium oxalate crystal formation, kidney stone formation. You just suggested that right there. You could also do it if you're not prone to developing those things either, because they don't just contribute to kidney stone formation, okay? They contribute to a lot of other things, it seems.
This is a good time for me to let you know that I am not a medical professional.
Doesn't matter if you were or not. Neither am I. I'm a high school graduate and author of, once again, contraindicated, critically acclaimed. Buy now.
I'm a certified nutritional consultant. I'm a
So what?
master herbalist,
Well, what? That doesn't have anything to do with this.
certified holistic health practitioner.
So what?
Through my studies, I feel I am qualified to at least give my opinion.
Everyone is qualified to give their opinion. That's why a high school graduate is sitting before you today, giving their opinion. And also giving facts, which is something that you're not giving. You're spitting information.
Check with your doctor and do your own research. So one
Well, you don't need to check with the doctor. You shouldn't be checking with the doctor when it comes to diet at all, because they're not trained in diet. If they did their own private training, then that could be a different story, but you also have to evaluate whether they did their training properly or not. So
Biggest things that people worry about with oxalates is kidney stones forming. One of the things
Well, you just suggested that they could cause that. Rightfully so, by the way.
that causes the stones to form is dehydration. If you don't have enough urine output, then there's no...
Oh, that's just a silly argument, isn't it? That really is just a silly argument. Are you serious? Well, one of the things that can contribute to your diabetes, your high blood glucose, is if you're dehydrated. Well, yeah, no shit. But that doesn't mean that dehydration is a cause of diabetes. I don't care how dehydrated you are, you're not going to develop kidney stones if you're not consuming a vast amount of oxalic acid. When it comes to the oxalate-bound stones, which may actually be all of them, but that's ridiculous.
For them to go. So being properly hydrated will help that as well. And people that have any kind of malabsorption disorders like Crohn's disease, celiac...
Oh, you mean Crohn's disease and celiac disease. So celiac disease is a result of, what is it? Gluten? Okay. And then the Crohn's disease, is that not a result of consuming lots of plants and contraindications in the human diet from plants?
disease or any kind of gastrointestinal problems
Yeah, like ones that develop as a result of consuming plants.
should not be doing oxalate because your gut...
Doing oxalate. First of all, no one should be doing oxalate. We've already covered this in the beginning, Victor.
bacteria is not able to properly process that to get it out.
Well, properly process it. So first of all, yes, you can have an elimination of bacteria like oxalobacter bacteria, okay, as a result of poor gut function. But again, it goes right back to the point of even if you did have it, it doesn't necessarily render the oxalic acid innocuous. It just means that it would be even more, it lowers your threshold of tolerance. Fine. But first of all, you definitely shouldn't be consuming oxalates and oxalic acid if you have gut problems, because how are you going to derive those oxalates and oxalic acid? From eating plants, which have lots of fiber in them, and also other toxins that would disrupt gut function? Lee Copus, everyone, Kent Carnivore, go check him out. Okay? You should also check his bag out.
The blanket statement that nobody should eat oxalates is just simply not true.
Well, hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. You can't say that an opinion is not true. It's neither true nor false. It can just be grounded in truth or grounded in falsehoods. Okay? And ours is grounded in truth, in first principles, rudimentary foundational levels of logic even. Not even just health and nutrition, logic. We already laid that out. That's your opinion.
And studies have proven that.
No, studies prove hardly anything, okay? This whole obsession with material science and investigation is just naive. It really is, okay? When it comes to the hard sciences like chemistry and physics, that's not naive, okay? It's why we have rockets and we've been on the moon, okay? And we have cars that we drive in, okay? I'm not pretending like that's silly. What's silly is this stuff, the abstract stuff, the inferential statistics, the predicting things like the weather and like your risk of developing this and what's healthy based on incidence rate. It's just bullshit, okay? Stop.
Don't get enough calcium intake, it's also a problem.
Well, define enough, because first of all, that's not what's going to cause oxalates to be a problem. Because guess what? I get sufficient calcium intake, evinced by the fact that I don't have symptoms that would indicate a calcium deficiency at all. However, if I was consuming oxalic acid, then it could cause me to have a deficiency in calcium because it binds to calcium in the ileum, in the small intestine. But that doesn't mean I'm not consuming sufficient calcium. It means I'm consuming contraindications, too many of them. They're a nutrient uptake inhibitor. Oh my God.
And if for some reason you can't have calcium, I would recommend eating lower amounts of oxalates.
Who can't have calcium? That's when you'd recommend consuming a lower amount of oxalates. What? So he said that he's a health consultant. Don't consult with him. Okay? Consult with someone like me or something, which you're only able to do if you sign up to be a member of the Carnivore Certification Program, headed by Carnivore Coach Peter. If you want to learn more about that, because it allows you to become an internationally certified coach, which means you actually have credentials to your name. It's easier to get insurance and things like that for protection, to protect yourself, okay? And among other things that you can talk to Peter about. If you're curious, get a hold of Coach Peter. His information is in the description below. You can sign up to consult with me over the modules that I contributed to the course. I contributed 4 modules, all about biochemistry, how the systems of the body work, pH. I alluded to, what that kind of looks like in the beginning of this video, pH balance, all that stuff, acids and dissociation constants and all that. If you want to learn more about that, you can consult with me, but only through that program. So anyway, this is once again with the whole, just because you can consult with people doesn't mean that you're right.
And people that have candida overgrowth or any kind of gut bacteria overgrowth, probably shouldn't do oxalates just because the bacteria may not be there that breaks down the oxalates in the body.
Okay, breaks down the oxalates to some degree when you are adapted somewhat to the consumption of them because you consume them regularly, which you shouldn't be doing.
Talking about larger amounts. So urologists have said now that across the board oxalate restriction is no longer recommended even for people with kidney stones.
Right, so an appeal to authority fallacy. Why would we listen to what these people say? Can they be wrong? Was this based on a consensus panel? So appeal to consensus and appeal to authority. They go hand in hand for that reason, because the authority recommendations are usually based on a consensus panel. So this is why, ideally, everyone would be able to be a scientist themselves. Once the free market does its thing, as long as we continue to, encourage free market systems to exist, things will become higher quality and cheaper across the board, allowing things like scientific equipment that are usually only present in labs, that are, exclusive to laboratories and therefore universities. The more ubiquitous they become and universal, then you just got to learn how to use it. That can be dangerous. You got to have some training with that for sure, with someone that has experience. But then everyone could be their own scientist. They could do things themselves and they can trust their own judgment instead of having to appeal to consensus and authority, especially considering the fact that they continue to be wrong over and over again. Over and over again, okay? Sometimes it's innocent. Sometimes people can be wrong, okay? But it does, kindle this desire to be like, well, no, forget it. Let me do it instead. Let me just see firsthand. That's what I want to end up doing eventually, but gotta get that money. And time, more importantly. Jeez.
If you have kidney issues, make sure you talk to your urologist about this and see what they think.
You can do that if you want. You can. I'm getting to a point in the video where I'm just like, okay, the anger has subsided. I've covered everything. It's like, you do what you want, guys, seriously. But I'm just saying, you could also just not consume them in the first place because they're not required and they induce harm above a certain concentration, above a certain tolerance level, according to one's tolerance threshold, according to their genotype and specifically expressed phenotype, respective phenotype.
Come to this conclusion is because half the oxalates that are actually in the urine are produced by your own body.
According to what demographic and what were they consuming and what did their gut biome look like that would influence the rate of absorption of the oxalates, like you talk about. What else were they consuming the oxalates with? What foods were they deriving the oxalates from, because they have a different ratio of soluble to insoluble oxalates and also ratio of oxalates to oxalic acid. What was the standard error, once again, if we're going to be talking about an inferential sort of population inference based on a sample? How repeated was the sample? I mean, science, guys. We gotta know this shit.
And not from the food. Kind of like cholesterol. So your urologist can do a test for high amounts of oxalates in your urine, and they only will recommend getting 100 milligrams or less, which, remember, the 6% rule, in their diet.
So they actually still put a limit on it. You said that they don't advocate for oxalate restriction. Seems like they still do. Maybe I misheard you. I'm not rewinding. I'm trying to get through this.
For people that have high levels in the urine. So get that checked out if you're concerned about it. So what can you do if you're worried about oxalates?
Well, he says, the number one thing is to not consume them, Victor. Mr. Prince.
One thing is get enough calcium.
Victor, no, that's ridiculous. Your entire philosophy here is eat calcium above what's required. Not enough. Enough to what, Victor? Enough to bind to oxalates and inoculate them to the greatest degree possible? Why would you do that? When I hear enough, I'm thinking about sufficient to subserve the needs for a human being. If that's what you mean by enough, then false, because if you consume enough by that definition, that won't necessarily inoculate oxalates. Will they? Or will it? Because it will bind to a lot of the calcium, and then if you're consuming more oxalate than the calcium that you're consuming that's sufficient for your physiological needs is too low or stripped away, well, guess what? Then you're going to still have problems, potentially.
Calcium-rich foods bind to those oxalates in the gut.
Oh, calcium-rich foods like spinach?
Prevent them from being absorbed.
To some degree, Victor.
Consider cooking any of your high oxalate foods if
we already covered that, didn't we?
Concerned about it. The oxalates will be leached out into the cooking water, and then they're gone. So some of the keto...
No. Some are gone.
...that we all know and love, like spinach, almonds, almond flour.
You guys may love it. We don't. Why would you love spinach?
Chocolate, chia seeds, all contain oxalates. But for
one of the many reasons to not consume them.
people that are telling you should avoid all oxalates, well, I've seen a lot of pictures on their pages of them eating bacon.
So, there's no oxalic acid or oxalates in bacon. And if there are, they're from plants necessarily, from things like a curing process. And the amount is going to be extremely low if they're cured with those things. Very low to the point of basically not being able to be noticed.
What? Bacon has oxalates.
Victor, what the are you talking about? What the actual are you talking about? No, it doesn't. This is a massive cope, Victor.
Processed meats have oxalates. So if
no, they have oxalates introduced in a very, 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 very small amount because of curing.
you're real about it, don't let me see any pictures on your page of you eating bacon and telling people not to eat high oxalate foods.
Oh my I'm done with this. This is absolutely bullshit. Good timing because the screen recording has 4, 3, 2, 1, done. Now it's stopped. 30-minute limit on each one. What the actual was that? Bacon, guys. Yeah, if you're having bacon, you gotta worry about those oxalates, guys. Because it's totally the same as 1 cup of spinach having 750 milligrams of oxalates in it. Yeah, that's good. That's really good, isn't it? Holy shit. Absolutely pathetic. You know what? This is why, I want you guys to understand, this is why I tell people, don't be tribal. Even though carnivore is like it's under the keto umbrella, they're not the same thing. It's ketogenic by the very loose definition of keto, which is basically entering a ketogenic, sort of a ketotic metabolism, basically, which you can do by eating plants. Sure, absolutely. You can even do it by eating fruit, just fasting, 1 meal a day kind of thing. You can even call that sort of a keto diet, but I mean, that's technically not in the definition. I understand, but that's not my point. You can think of it as, yeah, there's an overarching, category keto, and then there's subsidiary plant-based keto, carnivore, ketovore. Sure, you could think of it that way. And even in that comprehension, that doesn't mean to be tribal to all the other, oh, well, all keto I have a soft spot for, and therefore I should defend everything keto related. No, even then, it shouldn't mean that. However, there's also another way of comprehending it, which is species inappropriate diet, processed industrial diet, species inappropriate, and species appropriate. You can also think of it that way, because Victor here is not eating a species appropriate diet. That's what I have to say. This is why it doesn't matter. It's not appropriate. It's not even approximating appropriate. Okay. So anyway, I hope that this cleared things up for you. I really do. I think I explained everything quite well in the beginning. If you need to slow it down, that's fine. I go pretty deep into the stuff. I understand. But yes, don't eat oxalates. Don't eat oxalic acid. Don't eat plants. And I lay this out very clearly in my book. Once again, contraindicated. A closer look and revision of mainstream health axioms that have perpetuated illness, disorder, and disease for over a century. Once again, the second edition is out in paperback, hardcover, and audiobook versions. And the ebook, we're working on it. I recommend just being patient. That's all I can say. I am on top of it. It's just a matter of having to work with other people. I am usually a one-man team for the most part. However, I do have other people that I work with, and it's just up to when people can get things done. So anyway, if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. I do read them, even though I don't reply to them directly in the comment section anymore. Again, time is fleeting in my work weeks. And again, subscribe to the Patreon if you haven't already, like I said in the beginning. And finally, the link on the bottom of the screen that just randomly showed up. Wow, that was crazy. What is that link? Well, that is a link that will bring you to an amazing site with amazing products from an amazing brand known as Cerule. If you purchase product through that link, you will get a permanent percentage discount and permanent free shipping when signing up for monthly deliveries. That is the key. And also, if you email me behind the scenes at edgoki@pm.me, new email, you can learn how to earn those products for free, because who in their right mind wouldn't want that? But of course, I would not recommend purchasing any product at all, especially these ones, without knowing what they are. So fortunately for you, I have in the top right corner of the screen, linked there, a video, which is a complete explanation of what those products are, who should take them, why you should take them, when to take them, etc., etc. And I would also further migrate to the description below to find a video between myself and Professor Barquet on these products in further detail, as well as the company of Cerule itself, which I think is incredibly important if you are willing to purchase these products in the first place through said link. So, with that being said, join me next time when we react to someone else that justifies their addictions because they just love desserts. So, till then.